Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Tessa entices Daniel, and Audra accuses Kyle. Disclose that Billy Abbott makes an irate demand while Audra Charles will accuse Kyle Abbott. There will be a lot going on in Genoa City since Tessa Porter will also entice Daniel Romalotti Jr. Billy will first criticize Adam Newman and Chelsea Lawson more in Wednesday's Y&R episode. This might entail further media attacks or even the partnership that Joshua Morrow's character Nick Newman is now pursuing with Billy Flynn's character Kane Ashby. In any event, Billy will become enraged and demand additional details. Daniel will have a different perspective on Tessa. Although Daniel has been showing genuine affections for Tessa, Wednesday's show might make him even more attracted to her. Daniel might be tempted to tell Tessa how he feels or to kiss her, but will he take any risks? In any case, when they spend some intimate moments together, Daniel will have to resist some Tessa temptation. Then, with all the turmoil surrounding Kyle, Audra will attempt to turn the tables. Audra will act as though Kyle is the one who can't keep his hands and lips to himself, accusing Kyle of coming on to her once more. Claire Newman visits Nate Hastings to tell him everything about his girlfriend's activities, which could lead to Audra playing the blame game. When Victor Newman tells Audra to blow up her romance, Claire will be keen to reveal it. Claire will get ready to share some shocking information with Nate, who also needs updates on the kiss Audra planted on Kyle at Society. Even if Audra tries to avoid the repercussions of her actions, her strategy will ultimately fail. Their relationship is doomed to fail because Nate will put Audra in a difficult situation before the week is out and demand the complete truth. According to teasers on The Young and the Restless, Audra should be filled with regrets now that she has some bad news regarding her own romance on the horizon. Tessa Porter had never been one to tread lightly when it came to matters of the heart, and her history in Genoa City had proven that she could be both a dreamer and a risk-taker, someone who straddled the line between loyalty and temptation. But as she found herself in Daniel Romalotti Jr.'s orbit more frequently, the sparks that had once been easy to dismiss became increasingly difficult to ignore. And it wasn't long before subtle glances turned into longer conversations, lingering touches, and a dangerous undercurrent of attraction that was impossible to deny. Daniel, who had been trying to center himself in his work, his family, and his rekindled bond with Heather, couldn't help but be drawn into Tessa's artistic energy and warmth, the way she spoke of music, love, and life in ways that made him feel like his world could open up again after years of missteps. And though he knew that allowing himself to get swept up in Tessa's allure would complicate everything, he couldn't quite resist the pull, especially in the quiet moments where she leaned closer than necessary, smiled with a spark of mischief in her eyes, or brushed her fingers against his arm as though daring him to make a move. What neither of them realized, however, was that the more their connection simmered beneath the surface, the more it would eventually collide with the chaos exploding elsewhere in Genoa City. Because while Daniel wrestled with temptation, Audra Charles was busy crafting her own narrative of deceit, one that would place Kyle Abbott directly in her crosshairs, as she began to spin a story that would recast her questionable behavior as Kyle's relentless pursuit, insisting to anyone who would listen that Kyle was the one who couldn't keep his lips or hands off her, that Kyle had made her life unbearably complicated with his constant advances, and though some might question her sincerity, Audra delivered her accusations with the kind of cool confidence that often blurred the line between truth and fabrication, leaving Kyle in the position of having to defend himself against whispers, side eyes, and outright suspicion. Meanwhile, Billy Abbott, forever teetering between reckless impulses and genuine business savvy, found himself once again in the throes of frustration as his latest endeavors with Chancellor Winters and the never-ending rivalry with Adam Newman and Chelsea Lawson boiled over into outright fury, prompting him to make an irate demand for answers, for loyalty, for clarity in a world that seemed determined to spin out of his control. And while Billy hurled accusations and sought confrontation, Daniel's situation with Tessa reached a fever pitch, with moments of near confession where Daniel considered admitting just how strongly he felt, just how tempted he was to kiss her, to cross the line between friendship and something far more dangerous, yet always stopping just short, reminding himself that one kiss could set off an explosion of consequences that neither of them were ready to handle. But Genoa City thrives on explosions, and as Daniel and Tessa tiptoed around their growing connection, Audra continued escalating her scheme, trying to rewrite her kiss with Kyle at society as yet another example of Kyle's inability to stay faithful or disciplined, all while Claire Newman, ever the unexpected truth-teller in moments of high drama, made it her mission to expose Audra's manipulations, visiting Nate Hastings with every intention of delivering the shocking details of Audra's betrayal, armed with the knowledge of the kiss, the games, and the tangled web Audra had been spinning. Claire, who had her own complicated relationship with honesty and secrecy, seemed almost gleeful at the idea of blowing up Audra's carefully curated romance with Nate, especially once Victor Newman encouraged her to do exactly that, reminding her that sometimes the only way to protect family and loyalty was to tear apart the facades standing in the way. So Claire prepared to tell Nate everything, bracing for the fallout that would inevitably follow when Nate, a man who had been wading through doubts and suspicions already, was confronted with undeniable proof that his girlfriend's loyalty had been compromised yet again. The stage was set for confrontation on multiple fronts, Billy demanding details and control in one corner, Daniel fighting his attraction to Tessa in another, Kyle trying to wriggle free from Audra's poisonous accusations, and Nate preparing to demand the full truth from Audra, who, despite her confident front, was quietly filled with regret and panic as she realized that her strategy was crumbling around her. She could lie, she could deflect, but she could not stop the inevitable tide of exposure that was bearing down on her. Because in Genoa City, secrets never stay hidden for long, and every lie has a way of snapping back with twice the venom, threatening to destroy the very relationships it was meant to protect. And so while Tessa toyed with Daniel's heart and Daniel tried not to surrender to temptation, while Billy raged and Kyle fought to clear his name, while Claire armed herself with truth and Victor pulled the strings from behind the scenes, Audra's world began to collapse brick by brick, leaving her with nothing but regrets, shattered trust, and a doomed romance that no amount of clever spinning could save, because Nate was done with games and ready to demand the whole, unfiltered truth. And when that truth finally came out, Genoa City would never be the same again. The storm brewing in Genoa City was not the kind that could be easily contained, because once whispers of betrayal began circulating, they spread faster than wildfire and consumed everything in their path. And for Tessa Porter, what had started as a playful series of flirtations with Daniel Romalotti Jr. was now threatening to become a conflagration that could burn down her carefully constructed stability. She told herself she wasn't leading Daniel on, that she was merely enjoying their creative connection, the late-night conversations about music, art, and the struggles of balancing passion with responsibility. But deep down she knew that her smiles lingered longer than they should, that her glances at him carried more weight than she wanted to admit. And Daniel, for his part, was no innocent victim in the dance of temptation, because he had found himself seeking Tessa's company with increasing regularity, rationalizing that it was harmless, that they were just friends. But his heart knew better, and every time her laughter filled a room or her hand brushed against his, he felt the magnetic pull to cross that dangerous threshold into confession, into stolen kisses, into something that could unravel not just his world but hers as well. Heather might have sensed it in passing, a subtle tension when Daniel spoke of Tessa, and even Mariah's instincts might have been triggered if she noticed how Daniel's gaze lingered, but the true test would come when circumstances forced Tessa and Daniel into closer proximity, like the impromptu songwriting session that left them sitting side by side at Crimson Lights with their voices harmonizing so perfectly that Daniel couldn't tell whether it was the music or the woman herself that left his chest tight and his thoughts in disarray. And it was in these moments that temptation grew claws, sharp and insistent, daring him to risk everything for just one taste of what he thought he wanted. Meanwhile, Audra Charles was playing a far more dangerous game, one that involved not only her own reputation but also Kyle Abbott's, because her choice to recast her actions as Kyle's relentless pursuit was a gamble with stakes higher than she wanted to admit. And though she told herself she could spin the narrative, that she could convince others she was the victim rather than the instigator, she hadn't counted on the persistence of Claire Newman, whose allegiance to Victor Newman and growing loyalty to Nate Hastings gave her the perfect vantage point to dismantle Audra's carefully spun web of lies. And Claire was nothing if not determined, for she had spent too much of her own life drowning in secrets and facades to allow someone else to profit from deception at Nate's expense. Claire's visit to Nate was not just about revealing the kiss Audra had planted on Kyle at society. It was about laying bare the patterns of manipulation, the way Audra seemed to twist situations to her advantage, and though Nate tried to remain calm, his heart sank as the puzzle pieces fell into place, Because hadn't he already sensed her evasiveness when he asked direct questions? Hadn't he already wondered why she grew defensive at the mere mention of Kyle's name? And now, with Claire's testimony, it all seemed less like paranoia and more like undeniable truth, forcing Nate to confront the reality that the woman he trusted was perhaps the least trustworthy of them all. While Nate simmered with betrayal and prepared to confront Audra, Billy Abbott's fury was only growing, because his disdain for Adam Newman and Chelsea Lawson had reached a boiling point, fueled by what he perceived as their constant undermining of his efforts and their interference in projects he considered his own. So when Billy made his irate demand, it wasn't just for information or clarity, it was for recognition, for validation that his instincts were right, that his contributions mattered, and that he would not be sidelined yet again. In a world where he often felt overshadowed by stronger personalities, whether it be Jack, Adam, or even Victor himself, Billy's anger manifested in fiery accusations and threats of media exposés, and though some around him dismissed it as yet another of his impulsive tirades, those who knew him best recognized that this time his fury was rooted in deeper wounds, in a profound frustration at being underestimated, and the fallout from his demands would ripple outward into alliances, partnerships, and personal relationships alike. Kyle, caught in the center of Audra's accusations, was already struggling to keep his footing, because it wasn't enough that his marriage to Summer had been strained by mistrust and betrayal. Now he was being painted as a man who couldn't control himself, a reputation that clung to him unfairly and threatened to undo every step he had taken toward redemption. And though he tried to explain, tried to insist that it was Audra who initiated the kiss, that he had never pursued her in the way she claimed, there were always doubters, people willing to believe the worst about an Abbott because scandal made for better gossip than truth, leaving Kyle desperate for allies in a fight that seemed rigged against him. Victor Newman, observing all of this from the shadows with his characteristic intensity, saw the situation not just as a personal drama but as an opportunity, a chance to test loyalties, to expose weakness, and to maneuver his family into stronger positions while others tore themselves apart. So his encouragement of Claire to blow up Audra's romance was not merely about protecting Nate. It was about eliminating a destabilizing influence and ensuring that Newman power remained consolidated, even if it meant collateral damage along the way, because for Victor, power was always the endgame, and sentimentality rarely factored into his decisions. Yet even as Victor moved the chess pieces, the emotional fallout was unavoidable, because Audra, no matter how strong she pretended to be, could not ignore the gnawing pit of regret growing inside her as she realized that her strategy was not only failing but backfiring spectacularly, leaving her isolated, distrusted, and on the verge of losing Nate completely, a man who, for all his flaws, had given her a chance at something real, something she had managed to squander through deceit and self-sabotage. And so the stage was set for a series of confrontations that would rock Genoa City. Tessa and Daniel caught between loyalty and longing, with the ever-present question of whether one of them would finally give in to temptation and set off a chain reaction of heartbreak, Billy forcing those around him to reckon with his demands, threatening chaos if he didn't get the recognition he felt he deserved, Kyle scrambling to defend his honor against Audra's accusations, desperate for someone to believe his version of events, Claire ready to expose Audra's lies with the backing of Victor, ensuring that Nate would see the truth whether he wanted to or not, and Audra herself cornered, her regrets mounting as the walls closed in, knowing that once Nate demanded the full truth, and he would, there would be no spinning, no escaping, only the bitter reality of a romance doomed by her own choices, leaving her to face not only the loss of Nate but also the scorn of a city that thrives on watching the mighty fall, all while the rest of Genoa City watched from the sidelines, knowing that in this town, betrayal and temptation were never-ending cycles, always setting the stage for the next scandal, the next heartbreak, the next betrayal waiting just around the corner. The unraveling began in earnest when Nate Hastings finally cornered Audra Charles in the sleek yet sterile confines of Newman Media, his expression a mixture of disappointment, anger, and grim determination, because by the time Claire's words had sunk in, he already knew the truth in his gut, and now he was ready to hear it straight from Audra's lips, refusing to allow her the comfort of another evasive smile or half-excuse. "Tell me it's not true," he demanded, his voice low but fierce. "Tell me you didn't kiss Kyle. Tell me you haven't been lying to me from the start." And though Audra initially tried to mask her panic with bravado, insisting that Claire was stirring trouble and that Kyle had always been the aggressor, Nate's penetrating stare cut through every faucet until finally her shoulders sagged, her eyes flickered with guilt, and the silence between them was damning enough to confirm what she couldn't say, leaving Nate to declare that trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to restore, that he had been willing to believe in her but could not continue to stand by someone who weaponized deception as easily as breathing. The words sliced through Audra like glass, because while she had manipulated plenty of men before, she hadn't expected to care about Nate, hadn't expected to feel the sting of losing him, and as he walked out, her mask of confidence cracked wide open, revealing the desperation beneath, the realization that regret would now be her only companion. Across town, Billy Abbott was unleashing his own storm, this time at society, where Adam Newman and Chelsea Lawson happened to be enjoying a rare moment of camaraderie, unaware that Billy was about to bulldoze into their peace like a freight train, his voice carrying across the restaurant as he demanded to know how long they intended to meddle in his projects, how long they would continue undermining his efforts and treating him like the expendable Abbott, and though Adam fired back with his usual smug calm, reminding Billy that incompetence, not sabotage, was often his biggest downfall, the exchange quickly escalated into personal attacks, with Billy jabbing at Adam's endless failures and Chelsea snapping that Billy's self-sabotage was the only thing standing in his way, until finally Billy's anger boiled over into a promise that he would no longer play nice, that he would expose their manipulations in the press if he had to, because he was tired of being underestimated, tired of being pushed aside, and if they wanted war, he was more than ready to give it to them. Meanwhile, Tessa Porter and Daniel Romalotti Jr. found themselves alone again, this time in the dim back room of the music studio, where the air seemed thick with unspoken words and unrestrained longing, and though Tessa kept reminding herself that she loved Mariah, that her life was already complicated enough, Daniel's presence tugged at something deep inside her, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the way his voice dropped when he admitted how much he valued their connection, and in that suspended moment, as their faces drifted dangerously close, Daniel nearly gave in, nearly pressed his lips against hers, but at the last second he caught himself, pulling back with a sharp breath and muttering that he couldn't, that it was too risky, though the ache in his voice betrayed how much he wanted to, leaving Tessa shaken and silently questioning what it meant that she hadn't moved away sooner, hadn't stopped the moment before it even began. Outside that fragile bubble of temptation, Kyle Abbott was preparing to fight back in his own way, determined not to let Audra's accusations destroy him, so he sought out Mariah and even Jack, laying out his version of events, insisting that Audra had been the one to initiate the kiss, that he had no interest in pursuing her, and though Jack was wary, knowing his son's track record all too well, he agreed that Audra was far from trustworthy and promised to stand by Kyle if the fallout worsened, a gesture that bolstered Kyle's resolve even as he braced for the whispers and judgments of Genoa City. Victor Newman, of course, observed it all with his usual stoic detachment, taking satisfaction in the way Audra's lies were unraveling, in the way Billy's temper was destabilizing alliances, in the way Daniel's temptation and Kyle's battles were reshuffling the city's power grid, and while others drowned in heartbreak or betrayal, Victor quietly plotted his next move, certain that when the dust settled, the Newman family would once again come out stronger while their rivals lay weakened and fractured, because in his mind, the chaos of others was nothing more than a stepping stone toward the empire he intended to keep firmly in his grasp. And so, as night fell over Genoa City, the echoes of arguments, confessions, temptations, and betrayals reverberated across the city like storm winds, leaving everyone shaken, everyone changed, and everyone bracing for the next blow, because in this world, no secret stayed buried, no romance stayed pure, and no battle ever truly ended, it only shifted, waiting for the next spark to ignite the fire all over again. The fallout hit faster than anyone expected, because once Nate stormed out on Audra, word began to spread through Genoa City like a current no one could control, with whispers at society and crimson lights turning into a steady hum of gossip that left Audra cornered and defensive, and though she tried to reclaim her poise with icy confidence, everyone could see the cracks in her armor, the way her eyes darted when Kyle entered a room, the way her voice shook when Nate's name was mentioned. Kyle, emboldened by Jack's reluctant support, made it clear he wouldn't be anyone's scapegoat this time, telling Mariah that he was done letting manipulative women rewrite history at his expense, and though Mariah sympathized, she also cautioned him that reclaiming his reputation would take more than anger. It would take patience and proof, Two things Kyle wasn't always good at holding on to. Across town, Billy's tirade left Adam and Chelsea rattled, because for all of Billy's recklessness, there was a fire in his voice that hinted he might actually follow through on his threats, and Adam, who prided himself on staying 2 steps ahead, couldn't ignore the possibility that Billy might become a bigger problem than he anticipated, forcing him to reconsider his next play with a wariness he didn't want to admit. Meanwhile, Daniel couldn't stop replaying the near-kiss with Tessa in his mind, chastising himself for letting things get that far yet secretly longing for the moment they almost shared. While Tessa buried herself in music rehearsals to drown out the temptation, terrified that Mariah would see through her carefully guarded facade if she let even a flicker of guilt slip through her smile, and watching all of it from the perch of Newman power, Victor took in the chaos with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that each implosion, Audra's humiliation, Billy's rage, Daniel's turmoil, Kyle's defense, only served to weaken his rivals and strengthen his grip, leaving him free to plan the next decisive strike, because in Genoa City, while others floundered in the mess of emotions and scandal, Victor always thrived, always moved forward, always ensured the Newman name remained untouchable, no matter how many hearts or lives had to shatter in the process.